Hello and welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 4 and the final part in my Pastel Bird series. And in this video we're going to go ahead and put the final details on the bird and the fence post. If you want to follow along with traditional materials, check out part 1 in this series where I have a list of all the chalk pastels that I use and the materials that go with them. The app that I'm going to be using is ArtRage 6 for Windows. And here I'm just sort of blending in a little bit more the colors on the bird. And we just kind of want to get all the different colors blended in now. And we're going to start adding sort of the final details to the bird. And so we won't blend in things quite as much. And so here I'm adding a very light highlight to the feathers on the wing of the bird. And so you kind of want to leave some of the strokes visible there and sort of the lines to give it kind of a sort of a individual feather look there. And I'm also adding the details now to the tail and adding the black markings that are on the tail there. There's some little round circles there below the wing, and then I'm also working on the neck here, and I wanted to add a little bit of some dark brown because it's not completely black on the bird. There's a little bit of dark brown in those colors there, in the black markings there. You want to add a little bit of color to the black. That just makes it a little bit more gives it a little more depth, a little more three-dimensional. And then I'm also working on his feet and the fence post. And I'm using kind of a almost black or really dark charcoal color for his feet there. And you want to go ahead and just kind of add a little bit of a highlight to the feet. You're not going to see much, but you still want to show the little claws that are on his feet and that are holding on to the fence post. So I'm adding a lighter charcoal over the top of that. And if you're following along traditionally, you would be using your pencils, your pastel pencils, for especially at this stage, because this is where you add the detail work. And you want to try to get a brand that sort of has a soft pastel to it, because the harder ones won't, after a while, they won't write or whatever, won't come off on the paper. They'll just start taking the pigment off the paper instead of adding it to it. So you kind of want a brand of pastel pencils that have fairly soft tips here. And I have some Stabilo brand ones, and there's also I have Grumbacher, and there's just several different ones. You just kind of have to look and read the description on if they're hard or soft pastels. And so here I'm just kind of working a little bit more of the details on his eye, on his wings, adding a little bit of some darker lines to the wings to give that the shape of the feathers. And I'm working on the black markings around his neck and kind of feathering that out there, just giving it kind of a fluffy look there. Also working on the beak and just kind of putting the shadow underneath the beak there, and just kind of giving an overall refinement look to the head here. And you want to go ahead and probably, if you're following along traditionally, sharpen the tip of your pencil so that you can get some pretty good details. And just reduce the size of your brush in ArtRage 6 for that. Here I'm adding some highlight colors now, and I'm using white and a lighter yellow, and then sort of alternating back to a yellow ochre color. And you want to be able to leave individual lines on this part, because you want them to look like feathers. So this is where you don't smudge quite as much. You can smudge them a little, but keep the lines because we're now adding the detail and making it look like these are the feathers. And you can smudge these a little bit and just kind of bring them out on the edges, but don't kill all that line look, because you kind of want that little bit of detail there, because that just gives it the realistic feather look there. And that's kind of what I'm doing, just lightly going over the lines. And if you're following along traditionally, you would take your blending stump and just lightly go over them. Don't really blend strongly, just kind of lightly smudge. And so here I'm adding a little bit more highlight to the tail using a really light blue color. You can use white, but a light blue color will also give a really good highlight here. And I'm working a little bit more on the underside of the bird, just making sure that you can see the outline, the edge of the bird here. And working on the feathers on the tail, and again leave some individual strokes there, some individual lines, so that you can see the feathers. And here I'm adding some black again, and really outlining the wing there so that you can see the feathers on the wing, working on the shape of his head, and also the black ring around his neck, and adding the markings on the end of his tail. He has little black markings on the end of his tail, so you want to make sure those show up. Defining the tail feathers a little bit more. Just trying to get the final details. And then, of course, you want to put a little dot of white in his eye to give that his eye look, the reflection in his eye, and that just kind of adds life to your picture when you add that little dot to their eyes. And I'm also working on his beak and on his feet, just kind of adding a little bit more highlights, a little bit more dark. This is the final stage where you just kind of add really fine details to the painting, and you're not looking for any big changes here. And then I'm working a little bit more on the texture of the fence post here, adding a little bit of some reddish browns and some darker browns. And also at this point I'm leaving the lines in on the fence post. I smudge them a little bit, but we don't want to smudge them all the way out. And I'm adding really light orange for the final highlights there, and just kind of smudging them a little bit, but leaving those individual lines there to give it that wood and that bark-like texture that you would see on a rough fence post out in the country. And then I'm adding a little bit more of some highlight on the fence. These are going to be the fence post. These are going to be the final highlights, and I'm using the soft tip in Art Rage 6 to get the final highlights. And as you can see, I'm making individual lines, and I'm going to smudge them a little bit, but I'm not going to blend all of it away. So you just want to kind of get the look of individual ridges of wood reflecting the light off of it. And then I want to go ahead and add some more cracks, just a little bit more cracks to the fence post there with a little bit of dark. And again, leave the individual lines, just kind of smudge them in a little bit, but we don't want to get rid of all of them. And I'm adding a little bit of the darker wood color under his feet, so that we're making kind of a shadow where the bird is standing. You want to go ahead and make sure that there's a little bit of shadow there, and that gives the depth and the three-dimensional look to your picture. And so then I want to go ahead and shrink it down and see how it looks, compare it to the photo reference. That's one of the nice things about Art Rage, is that the photo reference is right there next to your picture, and so you can compare the two. And then I wanted to go ahead and make the edges of the bird stand out a little bit more against the lighter background. So I'm adding a little bit of some darker brown on the feathers, on his belly and underneath there, and a little bit on the top of his head. And just adding a little bit of darker blue there, because it gets a little bit darker towards the back of his head. just looking around and comparing it to the reference and trying to add just the final touches. And of course, pastel is sort of like charcoal, and you can work on it forever if you want to, but eventually you've got to find a stopping point. And here I signed it, but that doesn't mean that I was totally through, as you know when you watch my other videos. And I decided to add just a little bit more blue on top of his back and just kind of add a few more touches, just kind of defining his wing just a little bit more, and making sure that there's a little bit of a variation in the yellows. And so I kind of added a medium yellow color there, and then it flipped around, and so I had to use that little tool and flip it back around. Sometimes it does that when you're trying to pinch zoom. And so then I wanted to go ahead and just add a little bit more darkening the edges of the bird, just so that he shows up a little bit more against the lighter background that I have there. So it's all about light and dark contrasts in painting. That's what painting is about. So I just wanted to go ahead and give it a little bit more of a darker contrast so that he shows up a little bit better there. And smudge it in just a little. Don't smudge it in completely though, because we want to be able to see that darker contrast against the lighter background. And so I'm working a little bit more on his belly there, just darkening that a little bit on the top, just putting in the final touches and the final refinements of the painting. And then you step back and look at it and see if you like it, and I decided that that was good, so I went ahead and called it quits. And so this is the end of my pastel bird series. And if you want to see what I'm going to be doing next, well, stick around and hit that subscribe button. And thanks everybody so much for watching, and thank you for all your support. If you have any questions or anything that you would like to see me do in the next videos, leave them in the comments down below, and I will catch you later.